If I hadn't forgotten my passport, I'd still believe my husband's late nights were about debugging code and not undressing colleagues. It's funny how the universe works. One minute you're complaining about airport coffee, and the next you're discovering that your entire marriage has been quietly melting behind your back. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. That morning, I was in what I call professional travel mode. Camera bags packed, lens cloths folded with military precision, 2 external drives labeled with neat handwriting that said, Myanmar Portfolio, A and B. My house looked like a photography gear catalogue had exploded in the living room. Owen stood by the door in his spotless work shirt, scrolling through emails. He didn't even look up when I said goodbye. He just waved one hand like he was dismissing a cab. Good luck, Lil. Don't forget sunscreen, he said, eyes glued to his phone. Sunscreen. Right, I'd be photographing temples, street vendors, people with stories written across their faces. And he reminded me about sunscreen. That's when I realized he didn't even remember which country I was flying to. It wasn't the first time he'd been distracted, but lately his distraction had a sharper edge. Owen used to be all warmth and questions. Did you get the shot you wanted? Show me your favorites. Now he just asked logistical things. Did you book the parking? Did you lock the back door? He'd turned into a home security checklist with arms. By the time I reached the airport, my phone buzzed with a text from the gallery director confirming my exhibit slot for later that year. It was something I'd been dreaming of, a chance to show work that wasn't commercial travel photography, but personal, honest mine. I smiled for the first time that morning. Then I opened my purse to check my passport, and the smile evaporated. No passport. Just a crumpled boarding pass and a lipstick I didn't even like. I sat there for a few seconds, convincing myself it had to be somewhere. Maybe in the camera bag, the side pocket of the suitcase. I turned the car into a mess of zippers and straps before accepting the truth. It was sitting on my desk at home, right beside my favorite mug, mocking me. Perfect, I muttered, turning the car around. The flight wasn't for another 2 hours, so I had time. I imagined telling Owen how silly I'd been, both of us laughing about it later. That was before everything changed. Maple Crest looked almost artificial in the late morning light. Lawns trimmed to exact inches, sprinklers timed like synchronized swimmers, every car polished as if the neighborhood were competing for a magazine cover. My own house, grey siding, white shutters, too perfect, fit right in. Owen's car was still in the driveway. That struck me as odd. He should have been at work by then. Maybe he was taking a call or working from home. I didn't overthink it. I just slipped my shoes off at the door to avoid squeaking floors and hurried toward my office. That's when I heard voices upstairs. At first, I thought it was the TV, maybe one of those endless news streams Owen liked to play while pretending to focus on code. But then I heard him laugh. Not the polite kind, but that relaxed, warm laugh I hadn't heard in months. Another voice followed, a woman's voice. Light, melodic, too close. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, passport forgotten. You really think she suspects anything? She asked. No, Owen said softly. She's too wrapped up in her work. I can't wait till she's gone. This week will be perfect. My hands went still on the railing. Every cell in me seemed to hum, but I wasn't sure with what. Shock, fury, disbelief. I could see the faint shadow of their movement under the crack of the bedroom door at the top of the stairs. She giggled. You're terrible. Only for you, he said. Something inside me splintered in slow motion. I backed away before they could hear me breathe. My heart was hammering, not wildly, but with this steady, mechanical rhythm that made the silence louder. I walked backward until I reached the front door. I slipped out quietly, as if leaving a crime scene I hadn't meant to enter. Outside, the air smelled of trimmed grass and something faintly artificial, like detergent from the neighbor's dryer vent. I stood there barefoot on the porch, holding my phone, unsure whether to cry, scream, or laugh. I chose none. Instead, I sat in the car, hands gripping the wheel, and let my thoughts sort themselves into neat little boxes. That's what photographers do. We frame chaos into something digestible. I could almost hear my inner voice saying, "All right, Lila, focus the lens." For the next hour, I didn't start the engine. I just watched the window blinds shift upstairs, waiting for movement. Eventually, I saw Owen's silhouette pass by. Tall, easy stride, the man who used to bring me breakfast in bed on Sundays. I used to think that meant love. Now I wondered if it had just been routine. I couldn't cry. Maybe it was disbelief, or maybe the betrayal was too intricate to feel all at once. So I drove off, not to the airport, just somewhere, anywhere. There's a coffee shop near the lake where I used to edit photos. I parked there, ordered an espresso, and sat staring at my reflection in the window. I didn't look like someone whose life had just cracked. I looked calm. Too calm. My reflection even smirked back at me, as if saying, "Well, at least now you have material for that next exhibition." Sarcasm, my oldest armor. I opened my notebook and started listing every detail that had seemed off in the past few months. The late-night messages labeled team updates, the sudden gym membership, the new shirt I hadn't bought for him. It all lined up now, like pieces of an overexposed photograph finally coming into focus. Around noon, Owen called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Hey, did you find the passport? Hope you didn't miss your flight. Love you." Love you. The phrase tasted like metal now. That night, I came home as if nothing had happened. I even greeted him cheerfully. Guess what? The airline rebooked me for next week. He smiled like the charming liar he was, leaned in to kiss me, and I resisted the urge to pull away. Instead, I studied his face closely, the casual confidence, the way he believed I'd never notice anything. It was almost impressive. After dinner, he said he needed to finish some code for a project. He locked himself in his office. I waited 10 minutes, then quietly retrieved his phone from the counter where he'd left it charging. He'd used a passcode, but I knew it. His sister's birthday, easy to remember. Within seconds, I was scrolling through messages that confirmed everything. The words were casual, even banal, like something two colleagues might write, until they weren't. "I miss your laugh. You looked incredible today. I'll tell her soon." I took screenshots of everything, dozens. I copied them into a hidden folder on my laptop and backed them up. Every image, every timestamp, evidence not for court, but for myself, to remind me later that I hadn't imagined it. When I returned the phone, I stared at it for a long moment, wondering how many times he'd looked at it and smiled while I cooked dinner or edited photos. He came out a few minutes later, stretching, pretending exhaustion. "Long day," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "You could say that." He didn't notice the tone. He just nodded, kissed my forehead, and went to bed early. I sat at my desk, watching the small light on my hard drive flicker as the files transferred. The sound was oddly comforting, steady, certain. I spent that night planning. Not screaming, not crying, planning. Every step precise, every decision measured. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always spark rage. Sometimes it sharpens you. By 2 a.m, I'd outlined 3 things. 1, I would not confront him yet. 2, I would make sure he never saw me coming. And 3, I would never, ever be the sobbing woman begging for explanations. When dawn came, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and booked a gallery slot using our shared account. The exhibition title came to me instantly, Blurred Lines. It sounded poetic and cruel all at once. Later that morning, I mailed a neatly packed envelope to Tara's husband. Inside, a flash drive labeled "For Your Awareness." I included no note, no explanation, just silence. the kind of silence that speaks for itself. By afternoon, Owen was his usual charming self, making small talk about the neighbor's new fence and the upcoming neighborhood barbecue. I smiled and nodded, pretending to listen, while inside I was already miles ahead. People say revenge is dramatic. It isn't. It's methodical, quiet, almost domestic. It's the sound of a coffee cup placed carefully on a saucer while you plan the exact moment someone's world will tilt. That night, while Owen showered, I stood in the hallway staring at the mirror. My reflection looked oddly different, still me, but sharper, edges more defined. The kind of woman who no longer waited for apologies. When he came out, towel around his neck, he smiled. "You're quiet tonight." "Just tired," I said, returning the smile. "Long day of nothing, you know." He laughed and went to bed, unaware that I'd just pressed send on an email to my gallery contact, confirming the payment. Later, as I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the moment I'd heard his voice upstairs. How it had sounded both familiar and foreign. The sound of someone I knew so well that I no longer did. Outside, the sprinklers clicked on, watering the already perfect lawns of Maple Crest. Inside, my marriage was turning into a silent photo series I'd never planned to shoot. By morning, I was ready. Not for confrontation, not yet, but for patience. The kind that looks like calm, but feels like steel. And as I watched him drive off to work, adjusting his tie in the mirror, I realized something I hadn't before. I didn't want him gone. Not yet. I wanted him to stay long enough to see everything crumble from the inside. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the sound of a lawnmower in the distance. I stood at the window, holding my coffee, watching the car disappear at the curve. Everyone in Maple Crest would have called us perfect. The creative wife, the successful husband, the dream house. They loved stories like that because it made them feel like they lived in one too. But perfect is just a word, and I was about to rewrite ours, frame by frame. By the time my plane should have lifted off, I was sitting in my car again, staring at the house from across the street. Upstairs, the blinds moved slightly. A shadow crossed the room. My heart didn't break. It rearranged itself. He thought I was gone. He thought he had time. Let him think that. He'd soon learn that a woman who frames the world through a lens sees every detail, and once she focuses, there's no blur left to hide behind. The night after the airport fiasco was quiet enough to make me question if I'd imagined everything. Owen sat on the couch watching a documentary about software innovation, which is exactly as thrilling as it sounds, while I sat beside him pretending to scroll through travel blogs. I didn't hear a word the narrator said. I was busy memorizing the way Owen held his phone at just enough of an angle that I couldn't see the screen. That small tilt said more than any confession ever could. He laughed once, at something on the screen. Or maybe at a message that wasn't meant for me. His laugh used to make me feel warm. Now it just reminded me of upstairs voices I couldn't unhear. I waited until he went to brush his teeth before slipping the phone off the couch and opening it. He'd changed the passcode. I almost laughed out loud. Changing it now was like locking the barn after the horses had already escaped. I didn't need the phone anymore. I had the photos. In my studio, the laptop hummed softly, processing the backup of every file I'd taken from his phone the night before. I sat cross-legged on the floor, drinking cold coffee and reading through the messages again. It's strange how the words that once would have shattered you can start to feel like a checklist. Each "miss you" was another item to file away. Each heart emoji another step in the plan. He'd told her she made him feel alive. He'd told me the same thing once, years ago, right before he proposed. Same words, same pause, different woman. Consistency counts for something, I suppose. When he finally went to bed, I stayed in the living room. The house felt heavier somehow, as if it knew what I knew and didn't like it. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 columns across the top. What he thinks, I don't know. what I can prove, and how to use it. By the time I was done, the first 2 columns were full. The third just had one phrase: turn the truth into art. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his hands on his laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard like nothing had changed. I didn't hate him, I just didn't know him anymore. And somehow that felt worse. The next morning, I made pancakes. Real ones, not the protein kind he liked. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and nostalgic, almost mocking. When he came downstairs, he looked genuinely surprised. "Wow, this looks amazing," he said, kissing my cheek. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I said, flipping a pancake. "Just thought I'd cook before my next trip." He smiled, relieved, probably thinking I was back to normal. I let him think that, let him enjoy his breakfast. After he left for work, I opened my camera bag and pulled out my old field recorder. It wasn't expensive, but it was reliable, and it could record hours of audio without notice. I tucked it behind the books on the shelf in the living room, facing the couch where he liked to take calls. Nothing illegal, just gathering sounds in my own house. He'd never know. For the rest of the day, I worked on my exhibition proposal. I'd titled it Blurred Lines, a little on the nose maybe, but I liked the irony. Each photograph I selected had some hidden double meaning. A reflection, a half-seen figure, a horizon fading into fog. They were all moments where you couldn't tell what was real and what was just perception. Much like marriage, I thought. Around 3, Gretchen called. Owen's sister had perfect timing, like a mosquito that knows exactly when you're about to fall asleep. "Lila, dear," she said, using that tone reserved for both compliments and pity. "Just checking if you and Owen are coming to the barbecue this weekend. Everyone's talking about it." Everyone's always talking in Maple Crest. Talking, comparing, whispering. They'd build shrines to gossip if they could. "We'll be there," I said. "Wouldn't miss it." She hesitated, waiting for me to fill the silence. When I didn't, she sighed. "You know, he's lucky to have you. So grounded, always traveling but never distracted. Grounded, distracted." She emphasized the words just enough. I almost admired her precision. "Thanks, Gretchen," I said sweetly. "Tell everyone I'm bringing my camera. I'm thinking of documenting suburban ecology. It's fascinating how certain species thrive in artificial habitats." She laughed uncertainly, then said goodbye. I could almost hear her racing to tell someone what I'd just said, twisting it into whatever suited her story. Perfect. Let the whispers begin early. That night, Owen came home late again. He smelled faintly of perfume, something floral and new. I greeted him at the door with a smile that could have won awards. "Rough day?" I asked. "You could say that," he muttered, loosening his tie. "Tara's been under a lot of stress. She's taking the mentorship pretty seriously." I nodded sympathetically. "You're such a good mentor, Owen. Always so dedicated." He froze for half a second, then laughed. "Well, someone has to keep the younger employees on track." I leaned against the counter, tilting my head. "I bet she appreciates it." He looked at me sharply, then relaxed. "You're not jealous, are you?" "Of your work ethic?" I smiled. "Never." He went upstairs after that, probably texting her from the shower. I sat in the kitchen, sipping wine, and thinking how people always talk about betrayal as a firestorm. For me, it was a quiet drip of realization. Constant, measured, unstoppable. When he finally fell asleep, I retrieved the field recorder. The playback was mostly dull. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of cars, a brief phone conversation about a client. Then, toward the end, his voice softened. "Tara, stop worrying. She's flying out soon. It's fine." Pause. A faint laugh. "I told you, we'll figure it out." I stopped the recording and smiled. That was all I needed. Proof of tone, context, timing. The next morning, I transferred the audio file to my laptop, labeled it Soundscape Domestic Study. It sounded artistic, harmless. Everything about this plan would be wrapped in art. By noon, I had a gallery confirmation email sitting in my inbox. They loved the concept and wanted to schedule a preview. I used our shared credit card to cover the deposit. When the receipt popped up on my phone, I took a screenshot and saved it. Paper trails are important, especially when you want someone to trip over them later. That evening, Owen came home early. He seemed restless, pacing the living room, checking his phone every few minutes. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I set up my camera on a tripod near the window, taking photos of the setting sun. The light hit the glass just right, splitting into fractured colors that danced on the walls. "What are you working on?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Just capturing reflections," I said. "You can learn a lot about people from how they look in glass." He frowned, not sure if that was a joke. It wasn't. We ate dinner mostly in silence. He mentioned a new project at work, some data migration thing I didn't care about. I nodded in the right places, adding a polite, "That sounds challenging," every few minutes. I used to be genuinely interested in his work, but now it all sounded like background noise. After dinner, I excused myself and went into the office to edit photos. What I actually did was create an encrypted folder named Project Exposure. Inside, I placed every file, every screenshot, every audio recording. Then I emailed a copy to myself under a generic subject line, trip receipts. Before bed, I checked his phone again, not to read it, but to see if he'd noticed anything missing. He hadn't. The arrogance of cheaters is that they believe their deception makes them untouchable. It never does. At 3 a.m, I woke up suddenly. Owen was snoring softly beside me. I slipped out of bed and went to my studio, turning on just one small lamp. The light spread across my photographs, the ones I'd chosen for blurred lines. They all had one thing in common: edges that refused to stay still. I took a marker and wrote small captions on sticky notes for each print. Trust, façade, silence, control. Then I placed them on the floor, arranging them like puzzle pieces. By dawn, I had the skeleton of the exhibition, a visual autopsy of deception disguised as art. When Owen came downstairs that morning, he found me sitting among the photos, sipping coffee. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I replied. "My head's full of ideas." He smiled, oblivious. "That's my creative wife." I laughed quietly. "You have no idea." The following days passed in a strange rhythm. He grew more confident, probably believing I was too busy planning my next trip to suspect anything. I played the part well, cheerful, slightly distracted, endlessly forgiving. I even helped him pick a tie one morning, like a woman still invested in appearances. Meanwhile, I set the rest of the plan in motion. I reached out to the gallery's PR contact, explaining that my exhibition would explore modern betrayal and perception through metaphorical imagery. She loved it, said it sounded bold, intimate, timely. I didn't disagree. By midweek, I mailed the flash drive to Tara's husband. No note, no return address, just the evidence wrapped in plain paper. I dropped it into the blue mailbox near the grocery store, heart steady, mind clear. There was no triumph in the gesture, just precision. That night, Owen called out from the kitchen. "Hey, did you use the card for something called Gallery Loft?" "Yes," I said without looking up from my laptop. "For my exhibition. Remember? I told you I wanted to do something new." "Oh," he said, sounding distracted. "Yeah, sure. That's fine." The man didn't even register that I'd spent a few $1,000s from our joint account. Guilt makes people inattentive. Later that evening, while he was on the phone in the next room, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air smelled of rain and freshly cut grass. Across the street, Mrs. Campbell's curtains twitched. She was probably watching me, the way everyone in Maple Crest watched everyone else. They loved stories, even the ones they had to invent. Good. Let them start inventing mine. When I came back inside, Owen was finishing his call. No, she doesn't suspect anything, he was saying. Then he noticed me and quickly hung up. Work stuff, he added. Of course, I said, setting my keys on the table. He smiled nervously. You sure you're okay? You've been quiet lately. I'm fine, I said, just thinking. About what? Reflections. He frowned, clearly lost. You and your art metaphors. I smiled faintly. They're useful. They show what's really there, even when people think no one's looking. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, but something steadier. Control. The next morning, as I packed my camera bag for a local shoot, Owen kissed my forehead. Don't work too hard, all right? I'll try, I said. When he left, I opened my email. The gallery had replied again. They wanted a press photo of me in the creative process. I laughed, imagining Owen's face when he eventually realized that his downfall had been financed by his own bank account and immortalized in artistic form. Later that afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. You don't know me, but I think we should talk. Attached was a photo, Tara and Owen leaving the office parking lot together. She must have underestimated her own husband's sense of timing. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The universe had just confirmed that my plan was working faster than expected. That evening, Owen came home with flowers. I hadn't seen him bring flowers in months. He handed them to me awkwardly, as if unsure of the gesture. Just thought you might like these, he said. They're beautiful, I said. What's the occasion? He shrugged. You've been amazing lately. I guess I wanted to say thank you. I looked at the bouquet, lilies and white roses, carefully chosen. That's sweet, though you might want to hold on to the receipt, just in case. He laughed, missing the meaning entirely. When he went to shower, I stood at the sink, watching the petals tremble slightly from the air conditioner. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Before bed, I checked my messages again. Another text from the same unknown number. He'll learn soon. You did the right thing. I deleted it, then turned off my phone. The room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of Owen's breathing beside me. I thought about how many lies could fit into one life, how many ordinary moments could hide betrayal behind their edges. Tomorrow, the first press release for Blurred Lines would go out. The gallery would announce my debut as a rising photographer exploring the intersection of illusion and reality. I wondered how Owen would react when he realized he'd been funding both his own humiliation and my rebirth. Lying there in the dark, I felt something close to calm. Not joy, not triumph, just the satisfaction of precision. He thought the truth would stay hidden in shadows, but I was a photographer. Shadows were my favorite part. By the time Friday rolled around, Maple Crest felt like a theater set with everyone cast in their assigned roles. Lawn sprinklers hissed like stage machinery. The hum of manicured leaf blowers punctuated the quiet streets, and every neighbor who wasn't tending to their garden was strategically glancing through blinds. I drove slowly down our street, coffee in hand, noting which cars were parked, where and who had trimmed their hedges to perfection. The neighborhood's obsession with appearances was the perfect stage for what I had planned. I parked at the small cafe near the lake, the one where everyone who mattered to the gossip circuit eventually stopped for a latte. Today, I wasn't here for caffeine alone. I was here to observe. Not them exactly, but the dynamics, the subtle ways people smiled, exchanged glances, measured each other. I had always had a talent for noticing what others missed, a skill I'd honed over years of travel photography. Every detail mattered, and every detail could be used. Across the table from me, a young mother fumbled with her toddler, while her husband tried to look casual yet somehow authoritative. Across the room, a woman in oversized sunglasses leaned toward her friend, whispering so that only the edge of their conversation could reach me. I caught words like strange and looked different and smiled inwardly. A rumor is nothing until someone repeats it, and I was about to make certain the right rumors traveled. I took out my phone and drafted a few carefully worded messages, sending innocuous updates about Owen and that new colleague to selected contacts in our circle. Every word was deliberate, each one designed to spark curiosity without giving away the source. By lunchtime, I could see subtle changes, the way a neighbor paused when mentioning the Bentons, the way their voices dropped just slightly when Owen's name came up. It was working. That evening, I went to the grocery store under the pretense of running errands. The aisles were crowded, neighbors moving in predictable patterns, each thinking their little world was private. I passed Owen's colleague, Tara, who was shopping for some impromptu dinner. Our eyes met, and I smiled, innocently enough. A simple gesture, but it registered. She tensed, hurried down another aisle, and avoided me completely. I let her slow sigh escape my lips, just audible enough for a nearby shopper to hear. Gossip thrives on perceived tension, and I was cultivating it with the patience of a gardener. At home, I began working on my exhibition in earnest. Blurred Lines had become more than a title. It was a statement. Every photograph reflected some aspect of the betrayal I had uncovered, the distortion of perception, the half-seen truths, the quiet moments that carried weight far beyond their size. I worked late into the night, arranging prints, making notes, and crafting captions. Each image was a subtle jab, a reminder that nothing remained hidden when someone was paying attention. Owen came home unexpectedly around 10. He didn't knock. He didn't need to. The door had been left unlocked, a small oversight that might have gone unnoticed in the past. I was standing at the kitchen counter, arranging a few prints for lighting tests, when I heard him come in. "Lila?" he called, voice casual. "Hey," I said, not turning to face him immediately. He stepped closer, peering over my shoulder at the prints. "These are interesting." I smiled faintly. "Thanks. They're about perspective." He frowned, and I could see the tension register subtly in his shoulders. "Perspective?" "Yes," I said, finally turning to meet his gaze. "Sometimes the way you think you see something isn't the way it really is." He laughed nervously, brushing a hand through his hair. "Philosophical today, huh?" I tilted my head. "Or observational. Depends on your point of view." The room was quiet after that, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of sprinklers outside. Owen picked up a print and examined it closely, unaware that it was a carefully chosen image representing trust broken, a reflection in a puddle, warped and fragmented. "You're working hard," he said eventually, placing the print back. "I'm focused," I replied, pouring a glass of water and walking toward the living room. He followed, trying to make small talk, but I had no interest. Instead, I opened my laptop and began typing emails to select members of the community, teasing details about the creative exploration in the exhibition without ever directly mentioning him. Subtlety was key. Rumors take on a life of their own once planted. By late night, I had arranged a casual meetup with two neighbors I knew were close to Tara. Nothing direct, just coffee and small talk, but enough to imply that certain behaviors had been noticed. The afternoon's chance encounter at the grocery store gave me perfect material for conversation. "Did you see the way she looked the other day? Almost like she didn't want to be seen," I said innocently, leaning forward slightly. The women murmured agreement, their eyes wide, and I smiled politely. Gossip had begun its slow march. The next morning, I received subtle confirmations. Messages from friends hinted that whispers were spreading, questions being asked about Owen and his colleague. I didn't respond directly. That would spoil the effect. Instead, I took notes, observing patterns and anticipating reactions. Every raised eyebrow, every quiet pause at the bus stop, every small sideways glance added to the growing tension. Owen, of course, was oblivious. He came home that evening talking about deadlines and presentations, completely unaware that the social web he had ignored was beginning to tighten around him. I watched him, noting the slight furrow in his brow when someone mentioned work-related stress, and stifled a small smile. Timing is everything, and the closer he came to unraveling, the more precise my timing had to be. I spent the night reviewing every message, every email, and every photograph I had. I created a mental map of interactions, noting vulnerabilities, alliances, and likely responses. My mind was methodical, precise. Each neighbor's personality, each colleague's ambition, and every detail about Tara and Owen's dynamic was catalogued and ready for deployment. On Thursday, I staged the first minor confrontation. The neighborhood barbecue was in full swing, with perfectly arranged tables and lawn games that were intended to entertain, not to reveal truths. I arrived casually, camera slung over my shoulder, smiling and chatting politely. People greeted me warmly, commenting on the photos I'd posted from recent travels. All the while, I kept an eye on Owen and Tara, who were trying too hard to appear inconspicuous. I approached Tara under the guise of small talk. "I love your outfit," I said, voice light, eyes observing every twitch and micro-expression. "Did you pick it yourself?" She smiled tightly, nodding. "Yes, of course." "You know," I added casually, tilting my head as if remembering, "it's funny how people sometimes think no one notices their choices, their patterns, the little things." Her smile faltered slightly. She adjusted her clutch, her eyes flicking toward Owen as if to seek reassurance. I let the moment linger, a small pause, and then moved on. I wasn't trying to humiliate her yet, just enough to plant doubt, a seed that would grow unnoticed until the harvest. Across the yard, Owen was laughing with colleagues, showing a confidence that I knew was fragile. I walked past, casually dropping comments that hinted at awareness. Quiet questions about team projects, suggestions that employees had been talking, subtle enough to be shrugged off, but heavy enough to lodge in the mind. Later that evening, as the barbecue wound down and the sun dipped behind the trees, I retreated to my car to review the photos I'd taken. Each shot captured a tiny fracture, a sideways glance, a forced smile, a hand gripping a chair a little too tightly. They were almost invisible, yet undeniable. Every image told a story of tension and hidden truths, a story that I would present in blurred lines. Owen came out carrying a tray of desserts, smiling at me. "You've been quiet today, enjoying the barbecue?" "Yes," I said, leaning back in my seat. "It's fascinating to observe how people perform for each other, isn't it?" He laughed, misunderstanding completely. "You're always observing. That's why I love your photography." I smiled faintly. Sometimes observation reveals more than people intend. By the time we returned home, I had already drafted the next set of messages for selected neighbors, carefully wording each one to hint at impropriety without ever stating it outright. The goal wasn't exposure yet. It was anticipation, the building of tension, so that when the truth eventually surfaced, it would be undeniable. That night, I stayed up late, arranging the prints on the floor again, adding notes and small adjustments. Each photograph now had a hidden layer, a metaphor for the deception I had uncovered. I could almost hear the whispers forming in my mind, the conversations that would unfold once the exhibition opened, once the community saw what they had been ignoring. Owen came to bed early, exhausted from a week of work he thought was normal. I lay beside him, pretending to sleep, but my mind was far away, mapping the social terrain, plotting the next moves. His trust in my obliviousness was complete, and I intended to use it. By the next morning, the first subtle effects of my efforts were showing. Neighbors glanced at Owen differently, small remarks were whispered under breaths, and Tara appeared on edge, adjusting her hair, checking her phone compulsively. It was too early for triumph, but the undercurrents were shifting. At my studio desk, I opened the laptop again, reviewing emails, messages, and photos. I made notes for the next series of social nudges, each one intended to amplify curiosity, suspicion, and tension. The process was methodical, calculated, and deeply satisfying. I was no longer the person who simply reacted to betrayal. I was shaping it, guiding it, turning it into something unavoidable. Late in the afternoon, Owen returned, excitedly sharing some minor success at work. I nodded, listened, asked occasional questions, but all the while I was cataloguing the information, noting weaknesses, predicting next moves. The contrast between his casual oblivion and my meticulous planning felt almost cinematic. By nightfall, I had finalized a sequence of photographs that would serve as the opening for blurred lines, each one deliberately capturing the fractures, the half-truths, the silent betrayals that people prefer to ignore. I arranged them in chronological order, the narrative building subtly yet inexorably. Each print was a step toward the ultimate confrontation, a silent yet powerful statement of awareness and control. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The stage was set, the players unwittingly performing, and I, the observer, had become the unseen director. Tomorrow would bring new subtle moves, new observations, and the first real tests of the delicate web I was weaving. Owen slept peacefully beside me, trusting, confident, and utterly unaware that the quiet woman he thought oblivious had already begun orchestrating a careful, calculated revenge. And as I watched the shadows shift across our bedroom wall, I smiled. The game had begun, and I intended to win. By the time the weekend arrived, the neighborhood had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, into a new rhythm. The murmurs and sideways glances I had seeded earlier were beginning to take root. At the local cafe, I noticed the way Tara's name came up in hushed tones, paired with expressions of curiosity and judgment. People leaned in closer when discussing office dynamics, their voices dropping just enough for me to catch every word. I smiled faintly, stirring my coffee, careful to appear casual. Observation was my favorite weapon. Owen, as usual, remained oblivious. He arrived at the house late Friday evening, carrying a bag of groceries, like nothing had changed in his pristine world. He set the items down with precision, arranging vegetables, jars, and bottles, as though their alignment could maintain the illusion of perfection in our lives. I greeted him at the doorway, smiling, letting him think the past weeks had not altered me. "How was work?" I asked, pouring him a glass of water. "Busy," he said, brushing a crumb from his shirt. "Tara's been helpful, keeping everything on track. I couldn't do it without her." I nodded thoughtfully, leaning against the counter. "It's nice to have someone competent at your side." His eyes flicked up at mine, a micro-expression of caution that he quickly suppressed. He believed his words were inconspicuous, but I had catalogued every nuance of his behavior. I let him go, smiling faintly as he carried the groceries to the fridge, convinced of his innocence. I spent the evening in my studio, arranging prints and photographs for blurred lines. Each image was meticulously placed to reveal subtle fractures, reflections warped by light, half-visible figures, shadows that suggested more than they showed. It was a visual narrative of betrayal, perception, and control. My inner commentary stayed sharp, sarcastic, precise. "Nothing here is accidental, Owen. Every detail is intentional." The next morning, I decided it was time for the first act of physical retaliation. Symbolic, but unmistakable. Tara had left her car unlocked, a detail she never anticipated anyone noticing. I slipped out quietly, careful not to draw attention, and used a piece of chalk to leave a message along the driver's side door. Reflections aren't always flattering. Nothing permanent, no harm done, just a reminder that the world wasn't blind. I photographed the message, sending it anonymously to her husband later that day. A ripple of doubt was now set in motion. Returning home, I prepared for the subtle confrontations that had to occur that afternoon. The neighborhood barbecue, a weekly fixture, provided the perfect stage. I arrived with a camera slung over my shoulder, projecting casual cheer while scanning for moments of tension. Tara and Owen entered moments later, their smiles tight, their hands brushing too frequently. I lingered near the dessert table, striking up conversation with other neighbors, teasing mentions of interesting office dynamics and the importance of honesty in collaboration. Tara's reactions were immediate. She shifted, adjusted her hair, glanced at Owen, then back at me with the faintest flicker of recognition. I kept my tone light, measured, conversational. Observation and implication can wound as much as direct confrontation, especially when paired with the social web of gossip. The afternoon progressed with careful precision. I documented each subtle crack, the sideways glance, the micro twitch of Tara's mouth, Owen's attempts to maintain composure. I spoke occasionally to Tara under the guise of polite chatter. "It's impressive how you manage everything," I said, voice soft but pointed. "Balancing priorities can be tricky." She nodded, words hesitant. "Yes, it's manageable." I smiled faintly, allowing a pause to stretch just long enough for uncertainty to settle. Then I moved on, leaving her with the lingering weight of my observation. Back home that evening, I reviewed the photographs I had taken. Each one captured the minor distortions of behavior, the inconsistencies, the small gestures that betrayed tension. I labeled them, arranging them in chronological order, creating a visual narrative that would later be woven into the exhibition. The story of betrayal was now visible, frozen in light and shadow. Owen arrived late again, carrying files and muttering about deadlines. I asked polite questions, listened attentively, but made no comments that could betray my awareness. Instead, I catalogued his movements, the subtle cues that revealed stress, uncertainty, and the faintest traces of fear. The man had no idea how much I had seen. Late that night, I executed a second small act of physical revenge. Tara had left a vase on her front porch, an object she valued for its aesthetic perfection. I rearranged it, slightly off-kilter, as if a careless hand had passed through. It was minor, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but I knew she would notice. A photograph of it was sent anonymously to her husband with no explanation, letting him witness the effects of awareness without confrontation. The following day, I focused on enhancing the social tension. Small messages were delivered subtly through neighbors, comments at the cafe, casual mentions at school pickups, remarks about curious behavior at the office. Each whisper built upon the last, constructing a network of suspicion that I could manipulate at will. Owen, meanwhile, remained confident, unaware that the web around him was tightening. He approached the weekend with the same assuredness he always carried, discussing projects, mentoring schedules, and meetings. Every word he spoke, every casual gesture, was recorded in my mental ledger, catalogued for strategic use. That evening, I staged the most significant confrontation so far. Tara had agreed to a small dinner party at her home, inviting a few colleagues under the guise of casual networking. I attended, presenting myself as curious and friendly, camera at the ready. The moment I arrived, Tara's demeanor shifted, her practiced charm faltered, revealing cracks beneath the surface. I engaged her in conversation, subtle yet pointed, highlighting minor inconsistencies without accusing directly. "It's interesting how perception can differ from reality," I said, voice measured, eyes observing. "Sometimes people see what they want, and sometimes the truth is unavoidable." She forced a smile, adjusting her posture. "Yes, sometimes the world is complicated." I nodded, letting the silence linger. In social settings, silence can be as revealing as words. Her discomfort radiated in tiny movements, fingers tapping, foot shifting, eyes darting. Every detail was noted, every reaction catalogued for future use. Later, as the evening wound down, I excused myself with polite gratitude for the invitation. I returned home, reviewing each photograph I had taken, each observation recorded. I organized files meticulously, labeling each moment of subtle tension, every gesture that betrayed discomfort. The exhibition was no longer just a narrative of abstract betrayal. It had become a chronicle of observation, precision, and inevitability. Owen returned home late, his usual charm intact but slightly frayed at the edges. I greeted him with calm composure, concealing every detail of the day's orchestration. We ate in relative silence, his attention divided between conversation and messages on his phone. I observed him, noting how the minor shifts in the neighborhood and office dynamics had begun to affect his composure. After he went to bed, I remained in the studio, arranging the prints for the next phase. Each image now carried layered meaning, gestures, expressions, settings, and subtle symbols designed to unsettle without confrontation. I created a mental sequence for the gallery, ensuring that each piece would build upon the previous, escalating tension and revealing fractures incrementally. By midnight, the first minor victories were apparent. Whispers about Owen and Tara had begun circulating, small suspicions forming in the minds of neighbors, colleagues, and friends. Tara's husband had received the first anonymous message, a seed of doubt that would grow with time. My own reputation remained intact, my actions invisible yet effective. The following morning, I prepared for further observation. I reviewed emails, messages, and photographs, planning the next sequence of subtle nudges. Each interaction, each whisper, and each gesture was carefully orchestrated to maintain control over the unfolding narrative. Owen approached the breakfast table, cheerful, unsuspecting, commenting on minor successes at work. I responded politely, nodding, asking occasional questions. All the while, I catalogued every expression, noting cracks in composure, the faintest signs of stress. I anticipated his reactions, predicting the ways in which each social ripple would affect him. Later that day, I performed another minor act of physical retaliation. Tara's luxury car, parked carelessly on the street, received a small but noticeable alteration. A sticker, repositioned, easily removable, but symbolically significant. The photograph was sent anonymously to her husband, reinforcing the subtle narrative of exposure and vigilance. By evening, the neighborhood had shifted further. Glances lingered longer, whispers carried farther, and minor details accumulated into a tapestry of doubt. The stage was fully prepared, and all actors, especially Owen and Tara, were now participating unknowingly in a performance I directed from behind the scenes. That night, I reviewed the photographs, notes, and messages once more, arranging them in precise order. Each element was deliberate, designed to escalate tension and reveal truth without overt confrontation. The plan was advancing steadily, every subtle move reinforcing the narrative of awareness and control. Owen, once oblivious, had begun showing faint signs of unease. Small gestures, a tightening of the jaw, a pause in conversation, a glance toward the door, were catalogued for future use. The web was tightening, slowly, invisibly, and with precision. By the time I went to bed, I felt a steady calm. Each minor act of observation, implication, and symbolic retaliation had strengthened the framework I was constructing. The narrative of betrayal and awareness was unfolding exactly as intended. As Owen slept, unaware, I remained alert, reviewing plans, photographs, and notes. The next phase of subtle social manipulation, observation, and physical retaliation was already taking shape in my mind. By morning, the stage was set. The web of whispers, photographs, and symbolic gestures had begun to influence the neighborhood, Tara, and Owen. Each detail, each observation, and each calculated act brought me closer to the inevitable culmination, the moment when the truth would reveal itself in full clarity. The first 4 acts of my plan had been executed with precision: observation, subtle social influence, symbolic retaliation, and strategic documentation. The next stages would escalate, increasing tension, revealing cracks, and bringing every carefully orchestrated element together for the ultimate confrontation. I rose early, ready to continue the work I had begun weeks before. Each photograph, each message, and each whispered implication was now part of a larger structure, a narrative of revelation and retribution. The neighborhood, the office, and even Owen and Tara were now components of a living tableau, unfolding according to my design. By mid-morning, I was back at the studio, reviewing photographs, messages, and notes. The neighborhood's quiet observations and shifting glances confirmed the efficacy of the plan. Every subtle alteration, every whispered implication had begun to influence the dynamics of the environment around me. The stage was fully set, the players were performing, and the final acts were imminent. The web of observation, subtle manipulation, and symbolic retaliation had been woven with care, each thread contributing to the inevitable unraveling of lies and illusions. I paused, sipping coffee, reviewing the photographs one final time. Each image, each captured gesture, and each documented moment reinforced the narrative of control and awareness I had established. The exhibition, the social ripples, and the symbolic acts were converging toward the decisive climax. By evening, I had completed the final adjustments to the sequence of photographs, ensuring that each piece would escalate tension and reveal the fractures of perception, trust, and betrayal. Owen and Tara remained unaware of the full extent of my orchestration, their actions now guided subtly by the environment I had shaped. As night fell, I reviewed every detail once more. Each act, each observation, each symbolic gesture had been executed precisely, reinforcing the narrative of awareness, control, and subtle retribution. The next stage would involve direct confrontation, carefully planned and executed to maximize impact while maintaining composure and control. By midnight, the preparation was complete. The neighborhood, the players, and the environment had been primed. The stage was ready for the next phase, and I was poised to execute the carefully constructed plan that would bring every subtle move, every observation, and every symbolic act to fruition in a controlled, deliberate climax. The week after the barbecue felt like a quiet storm, brewing under perfect skies. Maple Crest looked unchanged, lawns trimmed, cars polished, but something beneath the surface had shifted. Whispers had begun to circulate, slow at first, then spreading like perfume in still air. Every mention of Owen's name carried a note of curiosity. I had expected this. At breakfast, Owen scrolled through his phone, smiling absently. "Tara's taking on more projects," he said, proud, as if mentoring her made him noble. I nodded. "She's lucky to have your attention." He looked up briefly, uncertain whether it was a compliment. I let him wonder. The plan no longer required constant effort, just gentle nudges. A comment here, a question there, and the neighbors' imaginations did the rest. In a place like Maple Crest, the smallest hint of impropriety was enough to turn conversation into obsession. By midweek, the effects were visible. Tara avoided eye contact at the cafe. Gretchen, Owen's sister, called just to check in, her tone sweetened with thinly disguised curiosity. Owen remained clueless, gliding through the days convinced that the universe still adored him. That evening he came home late, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. He loosened his tie, exhaled dramatically and said, "Work's been crazy. I might have to travel soon." I smiled, handing him a glass of water. "You should. A change of scenery might do you good." He didn't catch the undertone, too preoccupied with his reflection in the microwave door. On Thursday, I made another small move. Tara's husband, already suspicious from the anonymous flash drive I'd sent, received a new envelope, a printed message of Owen's mentorship disguised as professional correspondence. It was enough to deepen cracks that were already forming. No falsehoods, just truths framed at the right angle. By Friday, the first visible fissures appeared. Tara's eyes darted during conversations, her tone brittle. Owen's easy confidence began to falter. He fumbled small things, his keys, his words, his lies. He didn't realize that by then, the walls were talking for me. That night, the gallery preview drew a carefully chosen crowd: critics, neighbors, and Owen's colleagues. I dressed simply, black dress, camera in hand, playing the role of the composed artist, detached and analytical. Every photograph on the walls was deliberate, reflections of hands not touching, windows showing only one person's face, streets at dusk where shadows overlapped like lies. Guests whispered that the collection was intimate, psychological, deeply human. None of them realized how literal those words were. When Owen arrived with Tara, the air changed. Their attempt at casual grace was a performance already fraying. I greeted them warmly, shaking Tara's hand. Her fingers were cold. "I'm glad you came," I said. "You'll appreciate the perspective." She smiled too quickly. "Of course, it's beautiful work." "Thank you. It's about clarity," I replied, meeting her gaze. "How the truth looks once the blur is gone." Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, but enough for me to record mentally. Owen walked through the exhibit, pointing at images, pretending interest. "You've captured tension perfectly," he said, pride seeping into his tone, as though my art somehow belonged to him. "Observation is my job," I said simply. "You just have to stand still long enough to see what's really there." The evening unfolded slowly, every moment taut with unspoken awareness. Guests lingered near Owen and Tara, drawn by their discomfort without knowing why. A few whispered observations drifted through the air. "She seems nervous. He's distracted. Something's off." I didn't add to it. I didn't need to. When I presented the final photograph, a distorted reflection in a rain puddle titled "Parallel Truths," the crowd gathered. The image showed two figures blurred together by ripples, one leaning in, the other turned away. The caption read, "Sometimes you only see clearly after the storm." The silence that followed was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. Tara's face stiffened, Owen's jaw tightened. They both understood. Everyone else only felt the tension without context. Perfect. Afterward, Owen tried to act unfazed. "People love your work," he said, forcing a smile. "I know," I replied. "Art speaks louder than explanations." Tara excused herself soon after, pretending to take a call. Her husband arrived at the gallery minutes later, his expression unreadable. He walked past me without a word and stopped in front of Parallel Truths. His posture said everything. Owen noticed him too. His hand twitched slightly. He turned to me, voice low. "Did you send something?" I met his gaze evenly. "Only photographs, Owen. Just photographs." He stared at me, realizing too late that every choice he'd made had already been framed, printed, and hung on the walls for the world to interpret. As the guests filtered out, I walked to the center of the gallery, the lights glinting softly on each glass frame. The space felt different now, charged, still, complete. Owen stood by the doorway, expression shifting between confusion and something close to regret. Tara hovered beside him, pale and silent. Around them, whispers swirled like faint smoke, subtle but impossible to contain. When I passed him, I smiled faintly. "The thing about reflections," I said, "is that they always show what's real, no matter how much you adjust the lighting. He didn't respond. Outside, the night was cool, the air clean and quiet. Behind me, through the gallery windows, I saw people still staring at parallel truths, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. My story, our story, had been told without a single confrontation. No shouting, no drama, just light, shadow, and perspective. By the time I reached my car, the neighborhood looked unchanged, peaceful, unaware that its perfect facades now held a scandal beneath the siding. I sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands steady, feeling the calm of completion. Inside that gallery, every rumor, every whisper, every fracture had been framed exactly as I'd planned. Owen had lost more than his comfort. He'd lost the illusion that his lies could remain invisible. Tara's perfect image had cracked publicly, gracefully, irreversibly. I turned the ignition and glanced once more in the rearview mirror. The gallery lights glowed softly in the distance, steady, deliberate, final. The storm was over, and for the first time in months, I didn't need to plan what came next. The photograph had already developed, perfectly exposed. The night of the exhibition arrived with a quiet tension that hummed beneath the polished veneer of the gallery. Outside, Maple Crest streets glimmered under streetlights, sprinklers off for the evening, the neighborhood curiously silent as though anticipating something it couldn't name. I had arrived early, camera slung over my shoulder, carrying the composure of someone attending a regular gallery opening, while the undercurrent of strategy played out in my mind. This was the culmination, the moment where weeks of observation, subtle manipulations, and carefully orchestrated symbolic acts would intersect in a single, undeniable climax. Guests trickled in, faces familiar from neighborhood parties, cafe visits, and casual brunches. Their smiles were polite, yet their eyes flickered toward me with curiosity. They did not know the full story, but the tension that radiated from the room was palpable. I greeted each person with warmth and casual conversation, all the while noting the slight shifts in posture, the hesitations, the fleeting glances that betrayed interest or discomfort. Every observer, every whispered comment, every tiny gesture was a brushstroke in the tableau I had crafted. Tara arrived with Owen, her expression carefully controlled, but betraying subtle hints of tension. She smiled at the crowd, her charm practiced, yet her eyes searched constantly, darting to me, then to Owen. He walked beside her with the same confident posture he had carried for weeks, unaware that the net of observation and social orchestration had already begun to tighten around him. He glanced at me briefly, a casual acknowledgement, entirely unknowing that the narrative had been shaped to expose every fracture, every deception. The gallery itself had been arranged meticulously. Prints from blurred lines lined the walls, each photograph a fragment of perspective, betrayal, and perception. Reflections in puddles, half-seen figures, subtle distortions of light and shadow, all designed to mirror the fractures I had catalogued in the weeks prior. Captions were precise, understated, sometimes poetic, sometimes sharp, yet always evocative. The narrative unfolded incrementally, demanding attention while revealing layers of reality previously unnoticed. I allowed Tara and Owen to circulate, observing their interactions with the guests, their posture, and subtle gestures. Tara's forced smile and micro-expressions betrayed her anxiety. Owen's occasional hesitations and brief, distracted glances confirmed the effectiveness of my interventions. I documented everything, snapping photographs that captured nuance, micro-reactions, and the palpable unease between them. At one point, Tara attempted to approach me directly, her voice light, words chosen carefully to appear casual. "Your work is impressive," she said, her eyes flicking nervously toward Owen. "Thank you," I replied, voice calm, measured. "It's about capturing what people overlook, the truths hidden behind ordinary appearances. I let the words hang in the air, watching her subtly stiffen, noting every adjustment in posture, the tight grip on her clutch, the slight tremor in her smile. Observation, not accusation, had always been my method. Owen approached moments later, smiling confidently. "You've outdone yourself," he said. "The lighting, the composition, it's incredible." "Thank you," I said casually, turning slightly to acknowledge him. Sometimes it's the subtleties that tell the story. I let my tone imply more than I stated. Subtlety can be more powerful than confrontation, and the room absorbed the tension like a slow, settling weight. Guests whispered quietly among themselves, picking up on the unspoken energy, the shift in atmosphere, the dynamic that had been carefully constructed through weeks of manipulation and observation. As the evening progressed, I moved strategically through the crowd, maintaining casual conversation while observing reactions. Tara's attempts to control her demeanor were increasingly apparent, fingers tapping, shifting weight, eyes darting. Owen's occasional stumbles, small pauses in conversation, and the fleeting discomfort in his posture revealed the cracks that weeks of subtle pressure had begun to expose. I approached Tara again, this time with a seemingly innocent comment about perspective. "It's fascinating how light can transform an ordinary scene," I said softly, gesturing toward a reflection in one of the photographs. "Sometimes it reveals more than you expect." Her smile faltered, a slight shift in stance betraying unease. "Yes, it's remarkable," she replied, voice tight. I allowed the moment to linger, the silence a tool to amplify tension. Guests nearby glanced curiously, sensing the unspoken layers of interaction. Subtle pressure, observation, and strategic presence had created an environment where the truth was inevitable, though no direct accusation had been made. The climax approached as Owen and Tara made their way to the centerpiece of the exhibition, a large framed photograph of a street scene reflected in a puddle, fragmented and distorted. I had deliberately chosen it as a metaphor for perception and reality, its placement in the room calculated for maximum impact. I stepped aside, allowing them to examine it closely. Tara's breath caught subtly, her hand tightening on the frame of her clutch. Owen tilted his head, studying the composition, unaware that every detail mirrored his recent actions and the unraveling social dynamics he had ignored. I approached the group of neighbors observing their reactions, offering casual commentary. "It's interesting how perspectives differ," I said lightly. "Two people can witness the same scene and interpret it entirely differently." The words were innocent, yet the effect was immediate. Guests shifted their attention, curiosity piqued by the tension between Tara and Owen. Their unease was now visible, amplified by the social awareness and subtle orchestration of weeks of observation, minor interventions, and carefully deployed symbolic acts. I guided the conversation, allowing comments about perspective, perception, and observation to surface naturally. Whispers circulated, eyes flickered, and subtle gestures betrayed anxiety, discomfort, and the first signs of social exposure. Tara's attempts to maintain composure faltered slightly, her forced charm less convincing as the weight of observation pressed in. Owen, still confident on the surface, showed fleeting moments of hesitation and distraction, micro-expressions revealing vulnerability that had been carefully cultivated. The final stage unfolded as I directed attention to the last series of photographs, images depicting subtle fractures, misaligned perspectives, and half-visible figures. Each piece was accompanied by a caption that invited reflection, questioning, and observation without overt accusation. The sequence was deliberate, escalating tension and guiding the viewer toward realization. Tara glanced at the sequence, her expression tightening as recognition dawned in micro-gestures, a quick intake of breath, a hand brushing against her thigh, eyes widening ever so slightly. Owen studied the photographs, his confident exterior cracking, subtle unease appearing in posture, gesture, and expression. The cumulative effect of weeks of planning, subtle interventions, and symbolic acts was now fully manifest. I moved closer, pretending to examine a print, letting my presence reinforce the tension without confrontation. The room absorbed the energy, guests whispering quietly, reactions subtle but perceptible, social dynamics shifting toward clarity. Tara's husband arrived unexpectedly at the gallery, a small, calm presence that further amplified tension. Tara's reaction was immediate, a slight recoil, quick glance toward Owen, and an almost imperceptible flinch. Owen's expression shifted, the first real recognition of consequence crossing his features. Observation, manipulation, and timing had brought the situation to a point where awareness could no longer be denied. I engaged Tara briefly, voice calm, words measured. "It's fascinating how context changes perception," I said softly, allowing the statement to linger. She forced a smile, acknowledging the words without responding directly. Observation and suggestion had created pressure far more effective than confrontation could. As the evening continued, Owen's composure fractured subtly but steadily. He attempted to redirect conversation, deflect attention, and maintain control, but the social environment had shifted. Subtle cues, minor interventions, and strategic presence had combined to create a situation where every action, every gesture, and every glance was influenced by observation and the anticipation of consequences. I documented each moment, photographing interactions, gestures, and expressions. Every image was catalogued meticulously, forming the final narrative for the exhibition, an exposition of perception, observation, and the fractures inherent in human behavior. The culmination of weeks of planning, subtle influence, and symbolic retaliation had been achieved. Toward the end of the evening, Tara confronted me briefly, voice low, careful. You've orchestrated all of this," she said, eyes flicking toward Owen. "Or perhaps," I replied softly, "I simply observed what was already there." Her hand trembled slightly on her clutch, her composure cracking in a way I had anticipated. Owen's brief hesitation confirmed the impact of the cumulative tension and social orchestration. The final act was executed as I guided attention toward the closing photographs, images of fractured reflections, misaligned perspectives, and subtle distortions. Guests observed quietly, whispers circulating, awareness spreading naturally. Tara's discomfort was now unmistakable. Owen's confident exterior had fractured, micro-expressions betraying anxiety and recognition. I stepped back, allowing the moment to unfold organically. Observation, subtle intervention, and symbolic acts had converged, creating a space where the truth was visible, undeniable, and socially reinforced. The performance, carefully orchestrated over weeks, had reached its apex. As the crowd began to disperse, I reviewed the sequence of events in my mind. Every interaction, every subtle act, every micro-expression had unfolded according to plan. The exhibition, the social orchestration, and the symbolic gestures had culminated in a decisive, controlled climax. Owen and Tara remained, their expressions a mixture of realization and unease. The weight of observation, anticipation, and social consequence pressed upon them, entirely controlled and deliberate. I approached once more, calm, collected, and unflinching. "It's remarkable," I said softly, gesturing toward the photographs. "Sometimes people think what they hide is invisible. But perspective, it reveals everything." Tara's forced smile faltered, her hand tightening on her clutch. Owen's eyes shifted, acknowledging the clarity and inevitability of the narrative I had constructed. Observation, patience, and subtle orchestration had achieved their intended effect. The final photographs, the cumulative whispers, and the subtle social manipulations converged in that room, creating a moment of undeniable awareness. Guests observed quietly, absorbing the tension and the narrative. The exposition was complete. The fractures, the subtle betrayals, and the consequences were visible, orchestrated with precision and timing. As I stepped outside into the crisp night air, the gallery lights behind me flickering softly, I felt the steady satisfaction of execution. Weeks of planning, observation, and subtle interventions had culminated in a moment where truth was unavoidable, perception was challenged, and consequences were fully realized. Owen and Tara would leave the gallery altered, aware, and acutely conscious of the fractures in their own lives. The neighborhood, quietly observing, would carry the impressions forward, social dynamics subtly transformed. Every detail, every gesture, and every action had been deliberate, calculated, and executed with precision. I walked to my car, camera bag slung over my shoulder, reflecting on the meticulous orchestration. Observation, subtle social influence, and symbolic acts had converged to create a controlled climax. The exhibition had achieved its purpose, revealing truth without confrontation, consequence without excess, and awareness without dramatization. By the time I started the engine, the streets of Maple Crest were silent, the night calm, yet charged with the aftermath of revelation. The narrative had been completed, the stage fully realized, and the intended outcome achieved. I drove away from the gallery, every detail of the night clear in my mind, every interaction catalogued, every subtle act validated by observation and response. The night had ended on the peak of tension, clarity, and consequence. Observation, anticipation, and subtle orchestration had brought the narrative to its intended conclusion. No further steps were needed. The web of influence, social awareness, and deliberate exposure had fully revealed the fractures, consequences, and realities that had been carefully cultivated. I drove into the night, leaving the gallery lights behind, the narrative complete, the players fully aware, and the carefully orchestrated story of observation, perception, and subtle retribution concluded.